Chapter 13. The King's Castle. Herial. Things had calmed down after the king left Dragonstone. For a few months, all she did was familiarize herself with the castle, but it had grown a bit livelier again when Princess Rhaenyra announced she was pregnant and was expecting Laenor's fourth child. Then, a month later, Prince Daemon brought his daughters over from Driftmark to come join them at Dragonstone, and not for a visit, but permanently. She'd been overjoyed to have the twins around again. So it wasn't before a whole year had passed after Herial and Hagrid moved to Dragonstone that Princess Rhaenyra decided it was time they joined her to King's Landing. I usually fly there on Cyrex, but now that Maester Geraldis has judged Visenya stronger to travel, I will arrange a ship to sail to King's Landing so I may introduce my daughter at court. You and Rubius need to prepare for a fortnight of travel, Princess Rhaenyra said, walking around the back of the upholstered bench to take a seat next to her son. Prince Jacaerys sat holding his youngest sibling and making exaggerated funny faces in an attempt to make her laugh. The baby girl looked back at her eldest brother with dark violet eyes. Not much reaction at all on her chubby little face. "I'll inform him after our lessons, Your Grace," said Herial. Herial was curious to see the capital and thought it might be nice to see Helena and Aemond again. Both had visited Dragonstone at different points. Helena for a couple of weekend visits to look at Herial's copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. She adored the pages about Acromentulas and could gaze at the moving illustrations within the book for hours, while Aemond had been by 11 whole times. For each visit, Aemond pretended he was only visiting Dragonstone for the simple joy of flying, and Herial could have believed that. Mother knew she'd be flying everywhere if she still had her Nimbus 2000, but others didn't, and it had stirred up gossip about why. Some claimed Aemond wanted a squire for Sir Laenor. Unlikely, as Laenor had already taken his cousin Daeron Velaryon to squire, to spending more time with his nephews. Which was bullshit. The boys couldn't be in the same room without starting to argue about the stupidest things. To his secret lady love. Aemond had only recently turned 12. The only one he'd declare his love for was Vermithor, who was unfortunately taken. Herial knew the truth though. Vermithor's habit of rambling whatever came to mind gave Aemond away. The visits were not because the prince ever intended to visit his half-sister, but because Vermithor missed his Silverwing, and it had taken Aemond a few months before he gained control enough to stop his dragon from flying off to see his wife. What had they expected though? Vermithor had spent most of his life in a lair next door to Silverwing, and the capital was noisy and crowded. It had been over half a year since their last visit though. Herial's train of thoughts were disrupted when Jace made a particularly undignified expression, crossing his eyes and scrunching up his nose to make his sister laugh. Rhaenyra pinched her son lightly on the arm. "That's unbecoming, Jace. We have company." "It's only Herial," Jacaerys said. Or Jace, as Herial had started calling him. Just like she used Luke instead of Lucerys for his brother. As long as it wasn't an official setting, that's what most called them. Herial crossed her fingers behind her back, praying the boy wouldn't blurt out who taught him those expressions. "Jacaerys," Rhaenyra said warningly. "My apologies, Lady Herial," Jace said, looking up from his sister. Rhaenyra's fourth child, Visenya Velaryon, was born 3 months earlier, with a tuft of pale hair and violet eyes inherited from her mother. The first week, everyone had worries when the newborn caught a fever, but fortunately she'd pulled through. "Where is Mother, Joffrey?" Prince Lucerys piped up across the room. Herial glanced to the other end of the solar, where Luke was sitting on the floor with his younger brother Joffrey by the windows overlooking the Blackwater Bay. Joffrey would soon be 1.5 years old. He had recently started walking and his babbling was only just turning into a handful of words. Joffrey giggled and dutifully pointed towards Rhaenyra. "Yes! Good job, Joffrey," Luke said, giving his brother a short applause for being able to point out their mother. "Where's Luke?" Luke asked, and Joffrey pointed directly up at his brother's nose, laughing happily when it received him an even bigger applause than before, because both Herial and Princess Rhaenyra joined in. Jace would have too, but his arms were occupied with Visenya. "Where's Herial?" Luke wondered, and this time Joffrey hesitated. He looked towards Herial by the doorway and pointed a chubby finger at her. Herial was taken aback. She had not expected the boy would know that, but laughed and joined in the applause once again. Joffrey started clapping along too, finding the applause even more funny than the pointing game. "Where's Visenya?" Luke asked next, but that was a question too complicated and Rhaenyra stood up. "That's enough, dear. All of you should be on your way to Septa Mega's lesson. I'll take Joffrey for his new nap. Jace, hand Visenya to Brandis," Rhaenyra ordered. Rhaenyra went to her younger sons, kissing Luke on the forehead and lifting Joffrey up on her hip. "And remember your harps, boys." Luke fetched them from the princess's study and came back through the door with the instruments, just as Jace handed off Visenya to the nursemaid Brandis. Though Rhaenyra was the mother, royal women did not nurse their babies themselves in Westeros, but had a nursemaid do it instead. At least that's what Harriel had observed. Together, the three left in a single file down the twisting turnpike stairs from Rhaenyra's apartments in the Sea Dragon Tower to get to class. In the beginning, Harriel had mislabeled several of her new subjects as womanly arts, mostly because she associated them so strongly with things girls did back home. But that wasn't the case here. It was a stereotype set by her time with the Dursleys, slow to let go, yet here most of it wasn't considered feminine in the least. Like dresses. Sure, they had different names for it: tunics, surcoats, robes, hoopland, branchen, frock, crafton, surplice, tokman, alp, tabard, and so forth, worn by men as much as women. And if Uncle Vernon had seen men wear any of it strolling on Privet Drive, he would have called them freaks in dresses. The more correct term for the stuff Harriel learned would probably be courtly arts, since it was used to impress people at court and taught to the boys too. Which was why once Harriel learned enough common tongue to get by, most of her lessons with Septa Mega was spent alongside Rhaenyra's two oldest sons. Learning about the faith of the Seven religion was a bit intense, but not much more than Christianity was practiced by some of her neighbors at Privet Drive. As in all things, it differed from person to person, and though Septa Mega was definitely trying to convert Harriel, she wasn't being anywhere near as cruel or insistent compared to how Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia had tried to beat the magic out of her before, be it physically or emotionally. Harriel did not believe in the Seven who are one, but she listened carefully anyway, because it was necessary to know the beliefs of the people they lived alongside, to understand them, and religion was a huge part of it. Harriel was the immigrant here, and if she completely disregarded their beliefs, she'd be no better than an entitled Malfoy, who couldn't be bothered with anyone born from a different background than his. She also hoped that by showing respect for their religion, they'd do the same for her, and frankly, so far most of them had. Another thing she'd mistaken for girly was sewing, and sure, Harriel still thought it tedious, but it didn't mean she didn't try. Harriel thought maths boring too, but she kept working on that as well. Hagrid had been teaching her how to sew since the fishing town, as he'd been making and tending to his own clothes since his father died. The only difference between how he did it and what Septa Mega taught were the tools. Though the practice was far more time consuming without a sewing machine like Aunt Petunia owned, to know how to make clothes was an ability as necessary as hunting or planting food. In Westeros, everyone made their own clothes, and though Harriel once saw it as a boring womanly thing, it really wasn't. Sewing or making clothes had very little to do with gender, because here it was just life. There was a tiny percentage of nobles who didn't have to bother, and Harriel probably knew 90% of those on a first name basis already. But every other man and woman knew how to make clothes, from Lord Corlys to the poorest beggars. Sir Carl once mentioned he'd been making clothes since he was 5, from spinning the yarn to stitching on the last button. This knowledge was something everyone knew. From underwear to coats, all of it was homemade. It was true embroidering was something more commonly practiced among women, but even that was something men learned too. Though decorating clothes with embroidery was first and foremost a wealth flex, done to show status and extra gold. The music lessons weren't always so bad either. The singing wasn't far off from what Harriel remembered doing in secondary school, where the class had belted out Christmas tunes or the alphabet song. Once she got used to it, Harriel had actually spent several fun afternoons singing with Jace, Luke and the twins under Septa Mega's watchful eye. Luke couldn't hold a tune to save his life. Harriel was passable, the twins were a little better, while Jace had the best voice of everyone. "Do you think Septa Mega will make us revise the Field of Fire song again today?" Luke asked worriedly as they walked past the gallery. "Probably," Harriel said apologetically. A whole song? What would be the point of only doing half? Jace remarked. Since parchment was expensive, Westeros favored oral practices above the written one. It had made song, theatre and poetry a huge part of how history was remembered by the people. To learn a song was to learn history, even if some of it was romanticized. Then again, wasn't all history written by the victors? Heriel was actually bafflingly impressed by how the Targaryens had made an annoyingly catchy tune to tell the story of how Aegon and his sister wives went mass murdering through Westeros. But they'd done it. Hale heard it at least once a week, either hummed by some drunk guard in town or Princess Rhaenyra breaking her fast. Luke looked like a man heading for the gallows. You wouldn't feel that way if you worked to memorize the song like you were supposed to, Jace said, elbowing Luke in the side. It has 6 and 20 verses, Jace! Hale didn't remember all of it either. No, I did not, Hale agreed. But I asked Messenger Aldis to repeat it for me, and I think it will go better today. Luke groaned, realizing he was the only one who hadn't studied. Heriel learned as many songs from Septa Mega as she did Master Geraldis, but the former focused on singing pleasantly and proper word pronunciation, while the latter cared only for the correct lyrics. When a song could last for 30 minutes, it was actually very easy to miss a word here and there. It was like memorizing a whole bloody speech set to the background of music. The song they were memorizing today, Field of Fire, was about a major battle fought in the Reach during the Conquest, where tens of thousands of soldiers burned alive, resulting in a bloody capitulation of the Reach and Westerlands to Targaryen dominance. Though today it was better known as a catchy tune the Hightowers, who were ironically enough from the Reach themselves, liked to sing. There were countless songs like it, from glorifying the mass burning of Dorne to the slavery in Valyria. The more gruesome and crude, the more popular, especially among the general populace who liked a bit of dramatic tragedy in their songs, similarly to how Aunt Petunia followed juicy celebrity gossip, or Uncle Vernon liked yelling at the news on the telly. Heriel smiled sympathetically at Luke. Sing quietly and try to follow along as best you can. I'll hit a false note halfway through and then Septa Mega won't notice. She'll be too busy glowering at me. Septa Mega caught on to that trick weeks ago, Heriel, Jace reminded her. One of these days my brother will need to learn how to sing like a proper prince. Luke beats you on the harp though, Heriel reminded him. Luke was truly a natural, but Jace shrugged unbothered. Yes, Luke was far better, but Jace could play decently too. It was Heriel who dragged down the music quality in those lessons. To Lysaris and Heriel's delight, the lesson with the Septa was cut short. The other four might not have caught why, but Heriel suspected Septa Mega received her monthly unexpectedly early, since the woman ran off stiffly before they'd even reached verse number 9. Instead, the boys headed off with the Kingsguard, Sir Laurent Marbrand, to practice swordplay. Why don't you join us in our apartments? Bela asked Heriel. We can do something fun this afternoon instead. I will. I'll just bring back the harps to Princess Rhaenyra first and I'll join you, Heriel promised. Rhaenyra's apartment was empty when she reached the Dragon Sea Tower, so Heriel went in to put the harp away herself. In hindsight, Heriel wasn't sure how she missed the noises. She vaguely thought she heard something that didn't quite fit, but there was always sounds in the castle, from echoing footsteps, the wind hitting the walls or the rustling sea. Regardless of why, Heriel did not react to it in time. The study door wasn't shut all the way, only resting against the door frame, and Heriel had barely applied the lightest of touches, making the doors crack ajar when the noises hit her like a brick to the face. She saw the bear's outlines, and her mind struggled to put together the pieces. Her face flushed bright red when she finally understood that the two people were having sex over the princess's desk, and neither of them were Rhaenyra. It was Sir Laenor. And Sir Carl! Heriel staggered away and ran. Escape was her only priority as each beat of her breaking heart throbbed like repeating stabs to the chest. If you tell us what happened, we could help, Heriel, Rhaena had said mindfully, placing a gentle hand on Heriel's shoulder. Heriel hadn't even been able to hide away successfully. She'd completely forgotten her promise to meet the twins and they tracked her down instead. Yes, Bella said fiercely, looking ready to draw an imaginary blade and start cutting people down. Tell us who hurt you and we'll make them rue the day they were born. Ariel dried her eyes, but more just kept coming. No, don't worry yourself, forget it, she said, her face burning. The situation was mortifying enough, but getting caught sobbing like a baby by the twins in a corner of the Windworm Tower was too much. The twins were the last people Ariel could tell, maybe second to last. Oh, bloody hell, Chase and Luke. No, there was no way Ariel could tell anyone this. It wasn't even legal to be gay here, and no matter how much she hurt, she couldn't endanger Lenore and Carl that way. Nothing is wrong. Sure, because you normally want to cry without cause, Rena drawled sarcastically. Right, Bella? Bella snorted unladylike in a way the Septa would have pinched her for doing. Just tell us, Rena sighed. No matter what it is, you can tell us. Boys are stupid, said Ariel stupidly. Rena and Bella exchanged a look of wordless understanding. Very stupid, they agreed unanimously. King's Landing was a bustling port city, the size larger than anything Ariel or Hagrid had seen since England, crawling with people living in sandy low-rise buildings along the coast, with the King's Castle rising like a mountain compared to the rest. The Red Keep was a castle built of pale red stone with enormous drum towers. They passed through the massive curtain walls by a grained bronze gate, tall enough Hagrid didn't even have to bend. The inside was different though, as besides the main passage, a lot of the hallways were too narrow and low for Hagrid, though they had been assigned some rooms that were as accessible as they could manage. Since they'd arrived quite late and the king was already retired for the night, the official welcome was pushed to the following morning, and they were guided to their rooms to spend the night settling in at the Red Keep instead. On the walk to the throne room the following morning, Ariel noticed how many people were around now, not to mention how they stared. They always did, but here it was to such a degree that a guard busy gaping at Hagrid missed a step on the main staircase and toppled down most of it. He got right up with nothing worse than a couple of bruises, though at least for a little while, Hagrid's height wasn't all everyone whispered about. This would not only be Visenia's first introduction at court either, but Hagrid and Ariel's too. All hail Rhaenyra of House Targaryen, Princess of Dragonstone, and heir to the Iron Throne. Her royal consort, Sir Lenore of House Velaryon, the Unburnt, and their children, Prince Jacaerys, Prince Lucerys, Prince Joffrey, and Princess Visenya Velaryon. They waited with the crowd to be called forth while the king greeted his daughter's family and made fanfare about a newborn baby. In the meanwhile, Ariel gazed impressed around the stately throne room of tall stone pillars with huge arched windows. It was even bigger than the Great Hall back at Hogwarts. For her bubbling nerves about being at a royal court, their grand surroundings and worry about not making a fool of herself was overshadowed by one thing. Sir Lenore. He'd flown to King's Landing on Dragonback, saving Ariel from enduring a day-long voyage together on a ship. Though now Ariel watched Sir Lenore's back as he stood before the king with his son's daughter and wife. Did they know? The jealousy coiled like an ugly thing, even as Ariel knew it was useless. She had no right to feel this way. Sir Carl had never been hers. Still, Sir Carl had terrible taste in men. Just awful. Sure, Lenore was rich, pretty, and maybe he was good with a sword, but otherwise? Ariel had recently concluded Sir Lenore was the worst. With his stupid humor and the way he rambled when he told war story after war story, never getting to the point. And he rarely took anything seriously. He drank too much as well. What could Sir Carl possibly see in a plonker like Lenore? Oh, and the man had 4 children. He was married. Even if it was a political marriage and Ariel knew they were not in love, they were a family. That mattered. What did Sir Lenore have that Ariel didn't? Her face flushed. And then it was their turn in line. Dragon Handler, Rubius Hagrid, and Lady Ariel Potter the Unburnt of Bitton, the seneschal called loudly. Dressed in their finest, Ariel and Hagrid stepped out of the crowd to stand at the front of the center aisle before the Iron Throne. The many eyes on them made Ariel recall her first evening at Hogwarts, awaiting the sorting. Because in a sense they were here to be judged again. If there was one upside though, then it was how standing next to Hagrid always made Ariel the far less interesting one to gawk at. King Viserys sat in a massive throne built out of melted blades. The pointy monstrosity was even larger than Ariel imagined, with steps molded into the metal to reach the treacherous seat at the top. Ariel recognized Sir Christian standing on the left side of the throne, while the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard Harold Westerling was on the right. Stopping before the Iron Throne, they bowed and curtsied. "Welcome," the king said. He'd grown frailer over the last year, hair thinner, face gaunt and his skin patched with spots. "We're glad to have you as our guests at the Red Keep on such a joyous occasion as the introduction of my 4th grandchild." Their introduction was shorter than Princess Visinia's, which Harold was grateful for, as he returned to the crowd on the right side of the hall. They took a spot by the windows, so that Hagrid wouldn't be blocking anyone's view. When she craned her neck, Harold caught sight of Princess Helena through the crowd, standing across the aisles at the front, and smiled when their eyes met. The princess returned it, but, like usual, struggled to keep eye contact for longer than a couple seconds, settling for focusing on Harold's left ear instead. Otto Hightower, the Queen and Aegon were present too, though it took Harold a second glance to recognize Aemond, since he'd grown like a weed. Lanky and stretched the way boys were when their height grew too fast for fat and muscle to keep up. She looked forwards when the king accepted the first petition of the day, curious to observe how the ruling power of Westeros worked. The city of King's Landing was crowded, smelly, and noisy. Standing on the balcony, Harold could hear chatter rise from the population on the streets below. London had probably been louder, but Harold had grown used to the rolling landscapes of Dragonstone and its humble population number. After court, the royals were kept pretty busy. She wasn't sure what they were doing, though there'd been talk about a council meeting, and the whole royal family was going to dine with the king that evening, leaving Ariel and Hagrid to spend the day doing whatever they pleased. Hagrid made plans to see the dragon pit, and though Ariel planned to go see it too, she knew Jace and Luke wanted to show it themselves, so instead she made do with exploring the castle. The confusing hallways reminded Ariel a little of Hogwarts, and she was several times turned away from an area or other she wasn't allowed to enter. Instead, she ended up wandering through the training yards where guards were practicing swords, and then strolled along the castle banisters before she stumbled upon Daeron Valarian in the flower garden. As both a cousin and a squire of Sir Laenor, Daeron had joined Laenor to the capital, and was quick to offer her a guided tour. His timing was impeccable too, since Ariel had no idea how to get back to her room anymore. "How many times have you been here?" "5? Daeron answered. He was a couple of years older than her and resembled his father closely, except his silver hair was cut short. "Pardon, no, it's 6, Lady Ariel, though I do not recall my first visit as I was but a babe not much older than Princess Visenya. I know how to get around the castle though. You simply must see the south courtyard. It's a quaint space with a large weirwood tree." After a day exploring the Red Keep, Ariel hadn't expected to do anything but eat dinner, but then something unexpected came up. "I heard you had an exciting day," Ariel said in English, sitting down next to the last staircase step. She'd found Hagrid in one of the enclosed yards, a smaller one not too far away from Hagrid's room. It was dinner time and the place was deserted except for a guard stationed a couple of corridors away. "Yes?" Hagrid responded. "You need to see the dragon pit, Ariel. It's huge!" "I know, I can see it from my room." "Not the building, that's just the roof over it. I mean the cave system underneath. It's massive," Hagrid said, eyes wide with wonder. "I see why the dragons made lairs down there. It's pretty ideal. But the way these idiots chained them down..." Hagrid's expression switched to great offense. "It's an outrage, Ariel. Just because they want the dragons to be easily accessible from their fancy castles. It's dragon cruelty is what it is." "Did you listen any better this time?" Ariel asked. "Maybe a bit. Think one of them was taking notes on what I said at least," Hagrid allowed reluctantly. His common tongue was coming along well, maybe even better than Ariel's, since most remarked that she still spoke with a very thick accent. "Thermophore is too large for most of the dragon pit. He can get inside, but there's nowhere to get comfortable without approaching Dreamfire's territory. Dreamfire lacks her space, so the handlers were to dual fight for the larger cave tunnels. Instead they've changed Vermithor down at the beach. Though any idiot should know dragons shouldn't live in cities at all, Hariel. It's madness. They should be miles and miles off, flying free far away from humans. It sounds like the dragons got a lot better at Dragonstone. It's probably for the best that we left Norbert there. Hariel agreed, and then gathered her courage. Speaking of Norbert, I also heard you got into a pretty heated argument with the Hand of the King today. So you heard, eh? About the King's gift for Norbert? Yes. Hagrid had not argued with the King, but instead released his displeasure onto the unfortunate gift-bearer, Otto Hightower. They want to put straps on Norbert. I was alright with the collar, it's properly fitted and not that different from Fang's collar. There have been a couple times it has been necessary to restrain her from attacking, but this? It's not chains, Hale said carefully, and Hagrid gave her a sharp look. It's got a whole back piece strapped around both the wings and neck, Hariel. It's the underlayer the dragon saddles are secured to, but it's rubbish. Hagrid snarled, pointedly not looking at her as he talked. What'll Norbert need one of those for? No one's going to be riding Norbert, and I made it clear ages ago. So I told Lord Otter to go strap the saddle to his horse instead. But... No, Hariel. He cut her off gruffly. Would it really be so? I said no! I don't want you to ride Norbert, it's not safe. They do it all the time here, Hagrid. Hagrid said urgently, the dam starting to crack. You have ridden dragons yourself. You've flown Caraxes across half of Essos. Yes, and if that trip taught me anything, then it's that they're mad to keep doing it. Yes, I'll admit the dragons here are able to bond with humans, but Norbert is not like the dragons here. You know that. Harry looked away. The dragons here can use the mind arts. I've seen it myself enough to understand that. The dragons use it to communicate with each other and to their bonded riders. But Norbert can't do that, Hariel. You know she doesn't. Have you ever felt her mind brush against yours, If she do it with anyone, it'd be you. But I bet you've never felt anything of the sort with her. You should accept Norbert is a different species of dragon. It's how she was born. She can't change it just because all of her friends are different. Take it from me, I know just how that is. Hagrid said angrily. There's stuff Norbert can do that the other dragons can't. But the mind arts is something they have and she lacks. And it's that bond the Targaryen idiots keep using. How do you expect to steer Norbert without it, Hariel? She's not a bloody broom you can point around as you please. Putting reins on Norbert will have no effect. She'll fly wherever the hell she wants, and if you happen to be on her back, you'll be nothing more than a helpless passenger. Hariel tightened her hands into tight fists, her knuckles going white. Maybe that is so, but I can talk to her, Hagrid. Something none of the Targaryens can do with theirs. Norbert has been raised with dragons who carry humans, so she understands the practice. We've talked about it. Because of the Parcissal tongue, Norbert listens to me just as well as Caraxes listens to Daemon. No, I won't have you fall to your death because those idiots put stupid ideas into your head. I'm not. Just hear me out, Hagrid, No! Please! Hariel shouted, springing to her feet and leaving Hagrid stunned by her sudden outburst. The tail of a dragon statue fastened on the walls cracked off, falling with a crash onto the yard behind them. The wind rustled, and Hariel breathed heavily from the sudden rush of rage coursing through her. I have nothing from home! You got to bring along so much, Hagrid. Your pets, both Fang and Norbert, your wardrobe, pictures, furniture, tools, even your bloody house came along. But I didn't get that. Hedwig is... my broom. Bringing up all that was gone was tearing at old hurts, the pain throbbing like a reopened wound. Her throat was tightening up, her eyes stinging. Her friends, Hogwarts, the future Hariel was once promised. It was gone. Hagrid could keep fooling himself, but Hariel had stopped believing anyone would come for them. The only one who'd ever saved Hariel was standing right in front of her, which made it 1,000 times harder to disappoint him. Hagrid was the one who dug her out of the rubble at Godric's Hollow when she was a baby, and later the one who'd fetched her from the Dursleys. Dumbledore might have been the one to send Hagrid, but he's the one who showed up. The one who was there. The only adult who ever came true for her. He wasn't the smartest or the most brilliant at magic, but he was kind, caring, compassionate, brave, her friend, her family, the closest thing she'd ever had to her father, and so bloody blind! I had little to begin with, and yet I nearly lost all of it anyway, so can you just let me have this one thing back? I know it isn't safe. It was never safe to fly a broom either, but I was excellent. It's the one thing I had a talent for, something that was mine. I felt as home in the air as you do while caring for creatures. Her voice broke, and Ariel blinked back the angry tears, unable to look directly at Hagrid's hurt expression. It killed her to disappoint him, but he had to understand. It had nothing to do with the Targaryens. Even if they gave her the idea, this was about regaining a sliver of freedom. There were times Ariel felt like her freedom was slowly being stripped away piece by piece for each passing week. And it had been happening since long before they ran into any Targaryens. It had been her fate since they landed in this world. Ariel needed this. I understand it won't be like flying a broom. I'm not stupid, but I can talk to her. Allow me the chance to train her. You train Testals to fly passengers back at Hogwarts, so why can't I train Norbert while I have such a huge advantage as Persisseltongue? Ariel was absolutely certain that if they were still at Hogwarts, he wouldn't be this way. He'd have loved the idea of someone flying dragon's hair. He loved nearly all magical creatures, the more dangerous the better. But his increasing need to keep her alive and safe was fueled by guilt. Hagrid felt so bloody guilty that Ariel had been visiting him that horrible night when they were taken, that it was his fault Ariel was in Westeros. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But that was the past, and now his guilt was starting to screw over her future. We'll take it slow, and I'll teach Norbert the proper instructions. I've thought about this for a while. Left, right, down and up. I will make sure she understands the commands. But don't you get how important this is? I have a chance to fly again. Please, Hagrid, give me some credit here. I'm not a helpless maiden. I am a witch. Hagrid sighed, covering his face in his hands. Alright, he said at last, his voice muffled by his hand, and Ariel could finally breathe. Alright, I didn't know how much I just want you to be safe, Ariel. But alright, we'll try.